Well, speaking of changes, you know someone who's gone through a lot of changes in their life, guys?
Right.
That would be Britney Jean Spears, the subject of our first album review tonight. Before I get into try to synthesize Britney Spears' life into 5 to 7 minutes, God bless me, I'm going to first have Matt run down the numbers on this album, which is ellipses, Baby One More Time.
Yeah, what do you make of the? We talked about the parentheses. What do we make of the ellipses, John? Is that what's more annoying for you?
We've had others, like wasn't
Yeah, I know.
Introducing by DJ Shadow? Wasn't that an ellipses?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've had a
That
couple
title.
others. Yep.
I don't like ellipses or parentheses.
And Justice for All by Metallica is an ellipses. Yeah. No umlauts.
no punctuation.
No Motley Crue umlauts. Yeah. Baby One More Time by Britney Spears comes in at number 1,244 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 107 in 1999, number 7,607 of all time. It's Britney Spears' fourth highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, behind 2003's In the Zone, 2000's Oops, ellipses, I Did It Again, and 2007's Blackout. Baby One More Time did not make Rolling Stone's list, and Britney Spears is ranked number 1,103 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
Blackout ellipses would be interesting, or blackout exclamation point or question mark, right? You could just do a lot, but yeah, she was running with the ellipses for a while. Britney Jean Spears, born December 2nd, 1981 in Macomb, Mississippi. That makes her, as of the time of recording here in September 2025, 43 years of age. Let's go into the beginnings of Britney Spears, because it's the only time we're going to be covering her in album format. Now, we're going to be covering plenty of her singles later as we trace her evolution as an artist. But she was the second child of 3 of 2 parents. She spent most of her youth, even though she was born in Macomb, Mississippi, in Kentwood, Louisiana, which became part of the Britney Spears lore. I don't know much about Kentwood, Louisiana, guys, but I do know a lot about Kentwood, Louisiana, if you know what I mean, if that makes sense. So it's in the Bible Belt, and she was raised as a Southern Baptist. It's a very socially conservative area. She grew up singing in a church choir. And from an early age, actually, in 1984, so that was at the ripe old age of 3, she began attending dance lessons in Kentwood and was selected to be a solo performer at that recital. So she was a child star at a very early age, albeit on the local level. By kindergarten, she was singing in local pageants. And she also did gymnastics training, voice lessons, and competed on state-level competitions and children's talent shows. So throughout the 80s, when she was a very young child, she was there. I thought this was interesting, both in general and because I just listened to a 5-part podcast 2 weeks ago, guys, on this area. She attended the Bella Caroli gymnastics training camp, which... spoiler alert from the 30 for 30 audio podcast I listened to, not a fun place to be for a long period of time. So God only, between child stardom and being at the Bella Caroli training camp, I think we all know Britney has struggled a little bit with mental health and various issues. It all started to come together. Highly religious area, child stars at age 3 at the Bella Caroli Ranch.
Yeah, really.
She said as a child she was in her own world and that she found out what she was supposed to do at an early age, which actually kind of drew a little tear to my eye when I heard that. It's just very sad because at this time she's talking about being 7 and 8 years old, right? So, the empathy kicked in for me right there. At age 8, she traveled to Atlanta, Georgia to audition for the Mickey Mouse Club revival. I think everybody knows she, along with, Justin Timberlake, Christina Aguilera, Jessica Simpson, among others, right, were on that Mickey Mouse Club revival. She was rejected at that time for being too young, but she was hooked up with a New York City talent agent. One of the things you realize is that it seemed like Britney Spears came out of nowhere, right, when she dropped, but Britney Spears didn't come out of nowhere, if that makes sense. She ended up at the Professional Performing Arts School on the recommendation of Nancy Carson, this talent agent, and she was hired for the off-Broadway musical Ruthless. She was on Star Search in 1991. Keep in mind this is 91, right? So she is still only 10 years old at this point, living a intense life. By December 1992, when she was 11, she did make it to the all-new Mickey Mouse Club in one of the earlier seasons. Other members of the cast with her was Christina Aguilera, Justin Timberlake, Ryan Gosling, J.C. Chazé of NSYNC, and Kerry Russell of Felicity and Americans fame. So they were quite the collective of talent. I do remember that show vividly because my sister liked it, and they did like the roll call at the beginning, which is something that always gets stuck in my head.
We should do roll call.
When the show was canceled, she went back to Park Lane Academy in Mississippi, where she was considered to be popular, not surprising, but she said it was very cliquey and she was bored, which also does not surprise me because, by that point she lived a full life. Right. So she describes herself as the point guard on the basketball team. I went to the homecoming and Christmas formal, but I decided I wanted more. So in June of 1997, she meets manager Lou Pearlman, who, there's a whole CTS bio on Lou Pearlman alone. He was sort of like the Svengali of all the groups, right? NSYNC, Backstreet Boys.
Yeah.
Let's just say he is not around anymore, and he probably wouldn't be around anymore due to speaking out and cancellations. We won't get into that, but in her case, he was the one thing we will say good and trying to stay good is that he was pretty good at being able to hustle people, teenage stars, into the limelight, and he puts her in a female pop group called Innocence, Innosense. So like inno and sense, like sensory.
Oh God!
And while this is happening, she's in it, but she's also already making a pitch for solo performances. She's singing Whitney Houston and Toni Braxton songs, which is not surprising based on how she sounds on this album. And that lane of R&B, they decided wasn't really the right fit for her. 3 labels reject her. And then they said that she probably should reinvent herself as a pop group because bands like the Backstreet Boys and the Spice Girls are coming through. And one group I thought this was very funny said, there isn't going to be another Madonna, another Debbie Gibson, or another Tiffany. Which is hilarious in retrospect. Jive Records gets back to her. She does an audition in which she sings I Have Nothing by Whitney Houston, and she gets a record label. The president of the record label, I thought this was really interesting, begins to work on shaping her voice from sort of the more R&B traditional voice she has to a lower and less poppy voice that has a distinctive cadence, which mission accomplished, I think, in terms of like the Britney sound, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing I thought was the record label originally envisioned her as singing Sheryl Crow music, but a younger version of it, more adult contemporary. So that didn't happen because instead they decided to go pop and dance music. And Britney Spears kind of pushed for that because she was a dancer and she considered herself to be a multiple threat. So she begins to do a tour of shopping malls, which is like the Tiffany thing that I think of right there, and probably sounds utterly wild to anyone under the age of 35 listening to this podcast, but that was a thing, right, where people performed in shopping malls. Although by 1998 it already was becoming a little bit anachronistic, and she goes on tour as a opening act for NSYNC, who is also just starting out. Jive releases her debut album, Baby One More Time, in January of 1999, and it explodes very, very quickly. Hit Me Baby One More Time is released shortly ahead of it. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 and was certified 2 times platinum and eventually sold over 10 million copies. So there were 3 major singles off this one, Baby One More Time, You Drive Me Crazy, and Sometimes, and it did lead to a gigantic tour. I'm gonna stop there because boy, we could go forever in terms of where this where this can go. She changes in terms of her look at different times. There's a very interesting personal life that we tend to stay out of too much of the personal life stuff. We bring it in if it's important, but we won't go there because it's not fun to take easy pot shots. And all of us have a background of working with folks in mental health. But we'll just kind of leave it there. And we're going to probably just talk about like the Britney experience because we lived through it, right? Like we got to, I think Josh was still in high school. I was a freshman in college. Matt was in mid-college. So we were kind of in the peak demographic. Josh, I'll let you go first on this one. Thoughts on this album?
Yeah, weird to think of like a pop star being the same age as you when you're in school, and like because I always assume they're like older if they're like on the radio or something, but her being the same age as me is just kind of wild to think about. But yeah, this was a huge album. It was played everywhere. My sister was super into Britney Spears, and so she had this album. And I think she continued to be a fan, up to present day. And yeah, I can just remember hearing this song and the other singles on this album all the time. The three singles that you named. Listening to this album, I was disappointed. I thought it was a pretty superfluous album. I found outside of it leads with the three singles on the track listing: Baby One More Time, Drive Me Crazy, and Sometimes. Those are 1, 2, and 3, and then it goes into kind of like bubblegum pop mode with not a lot. I mean, I don't want to be too harsh on this album because it's just like very like bubblegum pop. There's not a lot of like thematic depth. Like every song is about love in one form or another. It's not like Britney Spears is writing about her I don't know, her struggles or her passions or whatever.
I don't think she's writing at all, Josh.
Yeah, that's probably true. Also, I found point being is I found the rest of the album pretty forgettable and annoying. I don't know if this was so. I listened to like the deluxe version of this album because that was what was available on Amazon. I don't know if they changed the production or if this is accurate, but I seem to remember like it's her like sounding differently on the album or on the singles.
Well, this is one of the big not that it was the first, but this is one of the big examples of that Max Martin, Rami Yacoub sound and songwriting, right? That's who produced this album. Deniz, Denniz Pop, right? Another person who's going to be omnipresent. They're all Swedish, right? And they all like are basically just churning out songs. So they are the engine of this album.
Okay. Are they the ones that wrote like the singles as well? Like, is
yes.
that okay? Gotcha. Yeah. So I guess I found the production on this album frustrating because I feel like Britney can sing and I can hear glimpses of it, but then it's also kind of like sometimes I feel like pushed to the background or kind of like altered, and she's like not able to be like unleashed. And then sometimes I feel like, I mean, there is like sometimes like backing singers or like singers that she's singing duets with almost at times, and the other songs are just like not as good as the first three. I was sometimes with these albums I'm hoping for like kind of deep cuts or like some kind of glimpse of something else, maybe some more like substance. And I think Britney, I think she probably takes more creative control further on. I don't want to be too harsh on her. Like, this is her first album. She's obviously young at the time too. And I think her songs do get better. And maybe she starts writing more, or I don't know, kind of. John, did you get a sense of like the overall?
She is not known as being a writer of her songs. Yeah, there are some, like anything, right? You dabble in it, but it's not like Mariah Carey, right? Yep. Who's writing pretty much all of her songs.
Yeah, I guess the other big thing about this album is the music videos that accompany it. That was a huge part of her popularity and them playing up kind of her sexiness and like girl next doorness, and the Baby One More Time videos like kind of iconic in some ways, and so that her image, and like you said that she was a dancer, like her dancing in the videos is another like kind of big part of her image. her popularity. So I unfortunately found this album a little disappointing, but I'm still kind of a fan of the singles and of her, her pop stardom. So thumbs in the middle, I would say.
Yeah, it's interesting when the album has the top singles right off the bat.
Yeah.
That's always kind of a little bit of a red flag for me. I kind of like it when they, pepper it in somewhere there, but it just like everything comes out right away, and it's like that's the bet. Those are the best songs on the record, and
yeah,
and they clearly are, right? Like the first two in particular, ones that I've always really liked. It's just the production behind it, the beat. It's really catchy, it's interesting, right? There's different parts. The bridge of Baby One More Time is fantastic, and the way that it builds, and like the emphasis that she gives, and the energy. It's just great pop songs. I forgot about Sometimes, but when that came on, I was like, oh, this is a nice, like, a little bit more of a ballad, but still, still pretty solid. So I've always liked the first two songs in particular, and got why they were popular. I think you're right, John. The videos, it's one of those like things that's like, hey, let's market this 16, 17-year-old kid as like this sex symbol in like schoolgirl clothes and stuff like that. And it's like the type of thing that like even people that don't like this music would, guys would keep the video on because it's like, that's how they were marketing her,
I do think it was funny, even though I didn't see this directly, that this was released January 12th, 1999. Britney Spears was born in December of 1981. I'll let you do the math in terms of how that lines up. So I just put two and two together.
Well, the recording started in November of 97. So it's like, so she's like six. Yeah. So the rest. So also you have to kind of couch this, anytime you're going to cover something like this and talk about it like in any critical fashion, which is, I guess, is what we're doing. You have to kind of say, this is not for us, right? It never was for us, even when, we were in, college and high school, that this is music, whether it was Britney Spears or like the Backstreet Boys or NSYNC or 98 Degrees, Christina Aguilera. Yeah. This was all like, this stuff is marketed primarily at preteen and even at some teen girls, right? That's you see the shows, the film from live concerts and stuff like that. And this is the stuff that like, it's that bubblegum pop that drives the girls out, and especially if the boy bands, right? Because that's when they would start, because the girls would all have their crushes on the guys and stuff like that. And and in some ways it's kind of funny because that's kind of what the Beatles were early in some way, like early on, like they were like a boy group. And now there's definitely a lot of differences in many ways, but like that's kind of what they were in those. That's why they had to stop touring, just because the screaming and stuff like that is what was very reminiscent of what would happen later on with like NSYNC, right? The way that little girls would kind of react to it. So you kind of have to like understand that this is not something that's really kind of marketed for us. But having said that, I do like good pop songs, and like I said, those other songs I do like. The rest of this album, it's fine. It's catchy, right? Like they got beats, and they Born to Make You Happy's got a good beat, and and I Will Be There is a catchy song and stuff like that. But it's like it's very like lowest common denominator kind of pop, I think. And I think for me, that what puts us over the top of being something that's really not my thing is, even for me as a non-lyrics guy, some of the lyrics are just like, now I am rolling my eyes, right? Like, email my heart, and like, and deep in my heart, I love you so, you just have to know. Like, it's just like, it's like, let's make and she's not writing it. These are professional musicians that are,
how I wrote it down, Matt, is I said, these are songs written by men as they imagine 16-year-olds think, right? Like 16-year-old girls think, and it's very obvious. Yeah. And I'll get into it in my take that's the point of view, I'd say.
And it kind of has to be, right? So for professional writers to write such terrible lyrics, it's like, yes, and it's, but again, it's the low hanging fruit. It's the ear candy. It's the connections, that little girls or little, preteens would make about like love and the simplicity of things, but also like, oh, but you can also relate to some of the heartache, right? You know, or so like I was born to make you happy. It's kind of like, that's a little weird. I mean, right? Like,
I'm going to put it out there. A lot of these songs are, I would say, borderline like kind of sexist. It's a lot like I did stuff to make you unhappy. And I'm going to do everything I can to make you happy. So yes, they're boiler. I noticed it very quickly. It's like, yes, these are all songs about love. But I'm like, why am I paying attention to it? And it really is a lot of like, kind of like the vibe of like, I'm sorry I pissed you off. I don't know what it is I did. But listen, my life is devoted to making you happy all day long. And I was like, you know, especially knowing a little bit of the vibe, right, of where it goes, I'm like, oh, it's but it was a little uncomfortable. Yeah.
It's pretty unhealthy, right? That type of mindset, you know, like, so,
well, it also shows the changing like pop landscape, because I don't think this would happen. These types of songs, and the marketing towards teens would not be written like this. And
the Sonic part would be still here, but
I mean, like there's stuff on True Blue that sonically is kind of like on Madonna's stuff that was kind of like this, like kind of a little bit more basic pop stuff, right?
Yeah.
But like,
but Madonna's never gonna fucking write a song.
No,
like,
but Madonna was a grown woman. You know, I'm talking about musically. Like, it's kind of, there's some simple stuff on there that's, because look, far be it for me to just like a really great, like catchy pop song, right? And that's what a lot of this stuff is. But like, if there's something about there's something about the vibe, there's something about the lyrics, and like how produced and like marketed this was. This is not like, this is not an artist, right? This is like a cash grab, right? This is like, let's get into a lab, let's like put all these things together to kind of like, you know, figure out the right formula to make as much money as possible. Yeah. And there's a place for that in art and pop culture, right? Part of this is for entertainment purposes and providing people with joy and, you know, happiness and whatever, right? An escape from like, you know, whatever's going on in their lives. So there's certainly a place for that, but like, yeah, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth to a certain extent. It's like that this is just, it's like, guys, it's so obvious what's happening here, you know, but they can hit. Baby One More Time is a great pop song. I will never turn that song off. I will never turn off You Drive Me Crazy. You know, it's just like, these are super catchy and I enjoy them too, but it shows you the difference of like what a really good, well-crafted pop song could be and what when you're phoning it in and just doing like a cash grab, you know, it's kind of what this is. So yeah, I would never go back to this. I'd put a couple of these songs on my master playlist and then I would move on. It's a thumbs down for me. It's not something that I'm going to listen to, but at the same time, it's also not for me. So, you know, take that with a grain of salt. But I think her voice, I know Britney kind of gets like crap with the rivalry with her and Christina Aguilera. It's like, you know, Christina Aguilera clearly has the better voice. Britney Spears' voice is like this breathy kind of like the inflection that she gives to it. She's doing some tricks, but yeah, it's not, the pipes aren't really there. I think that hers was more, the selling of her was kind of more in her image. You know, probably you know, the whatever dancing, I guess she's a good dancer. I'm not really one to judge dancing or anything like that, but like, you know, an attractive young woman or young girl, I guess, gosh, you know, that really was charismatic and connected with her fans. So yeah, but all that stuff, it's not for me. So, you know, I have to give it a thumbs down though.
Yeah, the reference point for this album for me is that New Kids on the Block album that we covered, Hanging Tough. I actually think it's very similar lyrically and the construction of the songs. There's a CTS that can be written about that. I think it's Chiron, Cheiron Studios, with the guy Dennis Pop, who was sort of the mentor. He died at 35, pretty much while all of his stuff was breaking. And then, you know, his proteges, right? You know, Max Martin is the famous one, but it's not just him, right? It's also Rami Yacoub. Fascinating, really, ever since, right? The sound of pop music has been, if I read you a list of the stuff that they're on, it's basically like, oh, like all of pop. So they kind of, I can even go further into like how Swedes have figured out like how to like dominate pop music. It's kind of amazing when you think of like ABBA and Ace of Base and I think Aha is Norwegian, right? But
Correct,
like
yes.
another one that wrote like maybe the most famous like one hit wonder pop song, at least in America. I know Aha has tons of hits in Europe, as I was reminded of like 100 times on the YouTube comments. But yeah, this one. So Britney Spears is an interesting one because I can remember her coming out. She's almost a direct age contemporary of me. So like as Josh said, it was interesting. She also had that interesting thing where. You like I feel guilty saying this, but you almost have to bake it in because it was so much a part of how she was marketed, and like I was the targeted demographic, right? That like she kind of, for a lot of folks, especially going to school in the Midwest, and I think the South, it probably was the case too. Like she straddled that line on this album of being attractive to them, but not uniquely attractive or intimidatingly attractive, right? She still kind of had that girl next door vibe, but like but with a like sexed up image, right? Like that is like a very decidedly like Southern thing to me, right? Like I'm super sexy, but I'm also really religious, right? Like kind of, and it was like one of those vibes that like I didn't know a lot of girls like that, so it was always kind of funny to me. And I can remember thinking like, oh, like this is an interesting image. And I think that was the first time I truly like processed, right, a pop star as, oh, like this is an image, right, that's in the world. Because I was too young to like, you inherit, like, I wasn't thinking like, oh, New Kids on the Block or a packaged, boy girl. Even like the Spice Girls, I kind of figured out like, oh, they're trying to make them like superheroes and stuff. But I still was, still listening to it as music, right? This was the first time that I was like, and I can remember friends and I talking about it. It's like, is she kind of like a jailbait like type deal? Is that kind of what they're going for? It's kind of weird that she's, singing all this stuff. And I only bring that up because, like you guys said, the image of her was so key to how she was sold, right? I won't say I was a big fan of any of these songs when they were in the world. I still won't say I'm a big fan of these songs. This style of pop music, it's very monotonous to me. The formula was still a little bit newer at that period of time. I actually find when Britney Spears brings in other producers like the Neptunes and stuff later, it's better it's more interesting. And as you know, Britney sheds this version of Britney pretty quickly by the time she's at like "I'm a slave for you" type version of it's, I guess, "Oops, I did it again" to "I'm a slave for you" is like a 2-year period, right? So she's evolving, and kind of Christina Aguilera was doing the same thing. She was going from like young Christina to like ex-Tina in like 2 or 3 years. So once again, we could do a whole interesting CTS about like the late 90s and early 2000s and the world we were in. And in some ways, like Britney Spears has like run the cultural wave, right, of America. So, as an album, this album, I found it to be pretty repetitive. If I'm being honest, that the lyrics were a little bit alarming to me because I quickly picked up on the theme of like self-flagellation a little bit in these relationships, and it didn't make me super comfortable. I'd say it's one thing to have like bubblegum pop songs, right? But to have ones where like at every single time it's like you just didn't try hard enough to make your boyfriend happy. It felt very like Phil Spector girl group, like 50s and 60s type stuff, like a throwback to sort of that, like that. Remember that one song by the Shirelles? It's like he loved me so much he slapped me in the face or whatever it was. And I'm trying to remember what it is, and I was like, wow, that's like that's an undercurrent, right? That's in here along the way. I did think that the Sonny Bono and Cher cover at the end was interesting. The very last song, just so you guys know, that was a cover of a Sonny and Cher song. Email My Heart is hilarious because it sounds I just, at the time, I think it was like, we're going to be ahead of the curve by writing a song about email. And of course, listening to it in 2025, it's like, wow, what an interesting relic this song is. But It wasn't in 99. You know, I think this is what this is. Every year past 1999, it just seems more ridiculous along the way. And the sentiment of it was kind of funny as well. But like there's plenty interesting about Britney, the person, both like her later music, and you know, she's a compelling figure. Like, people are very interested in what's going on with her. I think her early life is really interesting too, like this stage child type life, I found it really interesting to research her. I would probably argue that for me personally, this is the least interesting period of Britney Spears because the origin story is interesting and like where she goes musically and her evolution in life is there. At this, it's sort of like standard issue teen pop.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I don't, we all said that we liked that Spice Girls album, right? More than we thought we were going to, which is a good reference point, right? And we haven't done the Backstreet Boys or NSYNC. We're going to be doing them in the near future, right? And we're going to be doing like Christina Aguilera album. I don't think her first one, but I think the second one. So I'll reserve judgment in terms of couching her in like her with her peers, right? Like where she fits. But I will say the one that sort of is in this era that's there, I just found, even though it was standard formula, I found the Spice Girls version to have a little bit more oomph for me in terms of what this is. This was more like the New Kids on the Block album where we were all kind of like, ugh. Like if you lived through it, you might have nostalgia for it. But if it's, you know, after your time or, you know, to somebody like my parents, right? Like Britney Spears is kind of confusing because they're like, what's the deal with her? She's just like kind of a cute girl that writes like very generic pop songs, right? That I remember that was sort of my parents' take on it. But okay, if that's your thing, like as opposed to somebody like Lady Gaga, right, where they're like, oh, I get that completely, you know what I mean, like, or Madonna, right? So they're just like, okay, you know, that's fine. But you know, I can remember my mom saying over and over again, like something like she's no Whitney Houston or something, you know, and that, you know, is said sort of pejoratively, you know, and it kind of does remind me that like Britney's cultural clout, right, is in this 10-year window where she's a really big deal. And I think if you're slightly older than that or younger than that, like she's still well known and you know her, she's a reference point. But in that 10-year window, right, like it can't be overstated how much of a pop culture marker she is. And it seems like she's doing well these days, which makes me happy because reading her bio, you could kind of see how it was really a lot there's just was a lot, right, going on in her life. Mm-hmm. So, and I always pull for folks to kind of kick out, as they say, and find a lane of happiness for them. So